cut out what we don't need. You're going to have windy pops all the way through this, aren't you?
Yeah. You'll have to cut that out, Emma.
Is he going to keep repeating on
edit
you?
that back in, by the way.
You're
Don't
gonna
use that as your funny little quick thing at the start.
My name is Craig Taylor, and you're listening to Truth Lies and B2B Tech, a podcast for anyone engaged in complex B2B sales. Along with my co-host James Ingham, we discuss the latest best practices in marketing, sales and service. In each episode, we take a go-to-market strategy, look at it through a technology lens, and figure out if it's worth your time. We'll always cut through the bullshit, no fluff, self-serving agendas or veiled pitches. Just honest insights from people who work in the trenches. Enjoy the show. Today we're going to talk about outbound. It's a topic I think that often goes under the radar. Isn't talked about as much as inbound, isn't talked as much as other forms of marketing. To kick us off, I think we're definitely seeing a lot more interest in outbound, and that's with existing clients, that's with prospects. There's probably a number of reasons for that. We always talk about the economy and uncertainty and slow growth, and I think as a result of that, there's fewer opportunities, and as a result of that, more people are turning on the outbound tap to try and accelerate growth, find more opportunities, invest more in outbound. It flies in the face of probably some other conventional wisdom, certainly that you can see on LinkedIn, which is it's all about brand. So I think what we wanted to do today was just get into maybe why outbound is resurgent, and also the sort of differences between outbound as maybe people knew it a few years ago and the trends that we're seeing now in terms of a new way of working with outbound. Mm-hmm. You were going to say anything at any point?
Yeah, I didn't want to disrupt your flow.
Okay.
I think it's also worth touching on the reasons why outbound is often goes under the radar and hushed up a little bit. And I think it is pure snobbery at the end of the day. I don't think it's as fashionable. I don't think, it's as attractive, particularly to a marketing team, to admit that outbound is an important part of their approach. And often that means that it gets neglected, that it's, like you say, hushed up a little bit. And I think that's an important part of it. It's got a reputation issue, hasn't it? Outbound. Most of our clients have maintained some form of SDR, outbound, cold calling, if you want to call it that, approach since the dawn of inbound and even now.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think what I never personally like to see these kind of wild claims that something is dead, or, because at the end of the day, as you kind of alluded to there, with the most successful marketing functions are the ones that are really firing on all cylinders and doing lots of different things really, really well.
And in a very interconnected and coherent way.
Absolutely. So it will be inbound, it will be outbound, it will be referrals, it will be events, and wherever you place those different things. To coin the phrase from a famous book, when the CEO asked the marketeer, what's the best source of leads? The marketeer said all of them. And that kind of, sums up the best way of really looking at this. But that depends on a number of things. Obviously, larger organizations will have the funds, the resources to be able to have a really integrated multi-channel approach, but that's not necessarily something that everyone can do, and others need to be more choosy about the things they do switch on and invest in.
I think the SDR function is one of those essential things, though. We've obviously worked with a lot of clients, some with SDR functions and some without, and there's a marked difference, isn't there, in the performance of those from a lead generation, qualification and closing perspective.
Yeah,
with those that have that bridge between the marketing function and the sales team.
Absolutely. Yeah, and we've seen those without it, that things just sort of fall through the cracks, don't get followed up effectively. The vital cog in the wheel really is the SDR. Marketing can only take leads so far, and often salespeople, direct salespeople, field salespeople, wherever you want to call them, they don't really want to be saddled with prospecting.
And rightly so.
So if someone can take that on and serve them up leads at the right time, they'll be more than happy. So I suppose that calls into question how the SDR role is changing before we get into some of the sort of other trends. Because of the increased importance of SDRs, I think maybe historically it's been viewed as a function that maybe it's a new grad that's just come out of university, and maybe they can take that sort of first step into the world of work by taking an SDR role with a view to a career path in sales, and it's like the starting point in the sales career, moving into field sales and so on. But given the importance of it, you feel that maybe now people with more experience are going to be far more effective as SDRs.
Yeah, and I think as a result of that pathway, if you want to think of it that way, the SDR function is always looked at as a temporary thing. And part of the sales team, I personally think that it should have enough dedication to be its own team, because I don't think it's sales, I don't think it's marketing, but I think it gets pulled into the sales function more so, obviously, than the marketing side. But I think it should have a dedicated function of its own. So we see quite regularly, though, that the SDR function is poorly defined as a result of what you said earlier around the fact that it's seen as a stepping stone into the sales function. But it, in my view, deserves its own function with its own dedicated resources. Quite often we see clients that haven't got that dedicated function in place, and it means that the role is really poorly defined. It means that they don't have dedicated resources. It means that they don't have dedicated workspaces, dedicated tech, which we'll come on to later. And that, in the new world of outbound, is going to really reduce the effectiveness of that function. It's not the case that you can, grab a Yellow Pages anymore and just plow through it and dial as many people as you possibly can in a day. It's not a numbers game anymore. It has to be tech enabled. That means that it has to have the right level of dedication, focus, and investment.
Yeah, I think in larger organisations it is more of a defined discipline. But we've seen it work best when marketing, SDRs, salespeople, all part of the same growth team.
Yeah,
all got complementary goals. All really focused on the same ultimate goal, which is generating revenue, and contributing in their own different ways in a very aligned fashion, which is, I wouldn't say it's rare, but it's certainly not the norm in most organisations.
I'll just touch on something that you mentioned there around that really integrated way of those different functions engaging with each other. And I think that's largely one of the major problems with the way that it works currently, or has worked previously, in that oftentimes, I've said it again.
You said it again.
Quite often.
I knew you were going to say it today.
Marketing teams will pass leads to an SDR function for further qualification, then they'll pass them on to sales, which is the right thing. The problem is, I think, that when those leads are handed over at the wrong time, say, for example, the marketing team hosts a webinar and they send every single one of the people that attended that webinar to the SDR function for follow-up. Now that's going to be wasteful, because there are steps that should take place probably at a technology level to qualify that further before even the SDR gets involved, in my view. And certainly, and we've seen this before, it shouldn't go all the way through to sales at that point. So poorly integrated functions, SDR, marketing, sales, often is the issue that we see.
Yeah. So I think we're in complete agreement that the SDR function is certainly here to stay. It's been around for a long time. It
never really went anywhere, did it?
Never really went anywhere. There's always these calls that something's back, or it's dead, whatever it is. But at the end of the day, that function has been a mainstay for most growth teams over the last 30, 40 years, as far as I can remember. But I think the change is really happening around data and around tech. And I think inevitably the SDR function, it really flipped in terms of becoming more and more challenging than ever during the pandemic. Obviously, people went to more remote working, and therefore, as a result, people were much harder to get hold of through mobile numbers, and having that data was really difficult to get hold of. There's a whole plethora of tools that came out that would help with that, but nevertheless, you could see that the number of conversations per day was starting to diminish. And I think the old approach for an SDR or an SDR function, if you're maybe starting from scratch, it will be as simple as getting a list of potential prospects with their contact details and then just working your way through that list and cleansing it as you go, adding mobile numbers when you find them.
Numbers game, basically.
A numbers game, power dialing. There's all sorts of phrases, smile and dial. The traditional kind of SDR that was effective was one that was really prepared to bang the phones on a consistent basis and be comfortable with lots of rejection. But I think for anyone that's ever done that sort of role, you can quite quickly see why they want to move into a field sales role as soon as possible, because they're just going to get burnt out. So, but you do see now, whereas maybe not in the past, the SDR function is more celebrated in businesses. SDRs themselves are really proud of the role that they embark on. It's not just a stepping stone anymore. It's a longer term career. And I think that's because it is, it's professionalizing in many respects, and it is becoming more effective if it's done in the right way. And so some of those things that are changing when it comes to how an SDR operates, it is a lot more about prioritization, a lot more about personalization, and a lot more about using context.
Yeah, and tech enables that to happen, doesn't it? It's less about getting that big list and powering through it. It's more quality versus quantity these days, isn't it?
Yeah.
So tech is enabling that process to happen, isn't it? We've got signals, intent data, much more accurate firmographic data available, other tech tools that enable you to make more of a multi-channel approach or take more of a multi-channel approach, all of which are necessary these days for an SDR function to be successful. So it's probably worth digging into what some of those things are a little bit more, particularly signals and how that can be a really effective way to focus on the right leads rather than just working through them one by one. And for those that haven't heard of signals before, essentially they're events within a potential prospect's professional life that might indicate that they're maybe more receptive to a cold call or email or LinkedIn message, video message, voice note. We'll come on to that in a second. But it may be, for example, that someone's moved role from an organization that you used to work with. Someone's moved role anyway. That can also just be a good signal that someone's ready to engage. Maybe they've been promoted within an organization. It might be that organization's had a funding round and got some cash behind them. There's all of these things that aren't buyer intent data that might signal that someone's going to be more receptive. And using that to prioritize who you go after is one of the big changes I think that we're seeing in the SDR world.
Yeah, if you start the beginning and look at it more strategically, it's thinking through your buyer journey and what might trigger someone to become an active in-market buyer. So that could be, like you say, a new CTO coming into post. If we're going to take IT as the function that's the buyer, it could be a new round of funding, like you say. It could be an announcement of growth. They're going to open a new office somewhere, hire a whole bunch of salespeople, whatever it is. New investment in a particular type of technology. Sometimes it's big contracts that might have subcontracts, aligned to them. There's so much information that's available out there. There's information about maybe the CTO strategy that could be defined in an annual report. The challenge in the past has been, trying to aggregate that information and turn it into something that can be used used quickly and at scale in a SDR function. Obviously, AI steps in, and now this new wave of AI is enabling enabling companies to have the ability to bring this data together and start interpreting it in a way that enables you to start prioritizing which target accounts to go after.
Yeah, and surfacing it at the right time as well.
And then you add that with buyer intent data. We see that sort of broadly in two forms. That's tools like Zoom Info and Sixth Sense, where it enables you to identify where there's surges of interest in a particular topic aligned to a particular organization. And then there's obviously buyer intent when you've got more visitors coming to your website. And that's not just individuals, one organization, that's individuals, collective groups of people coming to your site, understanding frequency of how many visits they have to the site, number of pages they look at, etc. All of which is giving you an indication of how much potential intent there is. And you put all these things together, and you can, and if you've got AI at the heart of it, whether that's agents or you've got tools like HubSpot, Breeze Intelligence, for example, you can really start to prioritize who you go after. And it's not just a case of powering through, trying to make as many calls as you can in a day.
Yeah, and it's not just a case of just making calls either, as we touched on earlier. I think the traditional SDR role has been very much call-centered, hasn't it? I think certainly my experience has been that SDRs, certainly, in the traditional way, are less comfortable with more digital tools like sequences, HubSpot, for example, LinkedIn, even email to a degree. I think that it's always been the case that calling has been at the very center of the approach, and partially for some of the reasons you mentioned earlier, that getting mobile data, etc., is more and more difficult, and rightly so, probably. This multi-channel approach has now come into the fore, and needing to be on all those channels, and importantly for the SDR to be able to use them all effectively, is become much more important in the SDR process.
Yeah, which goes back to the point around the whole function professionalizing. It's not just about whether you're willing to pick up the phone and keep dialing. It's you've got to be an excellent communicator on the phone verbally, but also equally through written form in terms of email and message on LinkedIn. LinkedIn's now gives you the ability to leave voice notes and video. So it's very much a multi-channel world, and
you've got to be sophisticated enough to leverage things like automation in the right way.
Yeah. So we've touched on prioritization of target accounts to ensure that you're more effective in who you're targeting, who your outreach is going out to. We've talked about the multi-channel approach. I think the other couple of things that are worth talking through as well are personalisation, contextualisation as well. So that's really where you're leveraging that data to not just prioritise who you're going after, but you're also using it in your approach. So we all know the first sort of 10, 20, maybe even 30 seconds of a call are really key.
Well, I had one earlier today, actually, and the approach wasn't a good one, let's say. Not in my view, anyway.
This is a cold call.
Yeah. The first thing that the guy said, have I got through to James Ingham at Romney Associates? Yeah. Second thing he said was, I'm going to be honest with you, this is a sales call. He said cold call. He said, will you give me 30 seconds? I thought, well, I can't really. But the point is, that to me positioned it as, look, I've got you. I know you're not going to want to take this call. It was almost an assumption that he was harassing me.
Yeah.
And I didn't really feel it like that way. But,
you can kind of appreciate his honesty, but ultimately it's almost he's given up before he's even started.
Exactly.
Yeah. He's probably surprised he got through to you, and he's sort of retrenched straight away.
Didn't say what business he was calling from, didn't suggest what that business did. And therefore, how could I know if I wanted to give him 30 seconds or not? Let's not microanalyze that individual call, but how am I supposed to know if he calls me up out of the blue and says, can you give me 30 seconds? If I want to give him 30 seconds or not. If, though, he used personalisation and said something along the lines of, hi, I've just watched your latest podcast. Could see you were talking about the SDR role on that podcast. We're an organisation that focuses on SDR training. Then he's been able to use the data that no doubt he would be able to find about us to personalise his approach,
contextualise,
make it relevant to what we do, and therefore, and if he then asked me, "Will you give me 30 seconds?" I'd probably say yes.
Yeah. You've got your interest at that point. And the problem with the old approach, not just the whole kind of smile and dial and hit the phones and bang out as many calls as you can in a day. It's also, when you do get through to those people, it's just a generic pitch to the same people every time. So, James, you're a HubSpot partner. We've got X, Y, and Z tool that integrates with HubSpot. They'll trot that same message out to everyone else. And as the receiver of that message, you just feel they're just not really making any effort. so they're not really worth my time. But if you feel that someone has researched your business and what they've come up with is accurate, they
And
understand you a little bit more, they've contextualized how they position the opening of the call, so it's more relevant to you, you're far more likely to actually take.
Exactly, because ultimately what that tells you is that they've done all of that research before deciding whether to call you or not, and they've chosen to call you because that research would suggest that what they're actually about to tell you might actually be helpful. If it's just scattergun, and like in the call earlier, that's kind of admitted up front that it's a disruption and, you know, there's been little effort to understand my requirements, then instantly you're feeling that it's probably not going to be worth your while.
Yeah. I mean, we still know that there's a lot of organizations that take these approaches. I mean, sadly, it's so draconian now. I mean, when I first started, my first ever job, believe it or not, was in a call center in a big room, square table with about 20 other people.
Is this
in
where
it.
you had to wear the dunce's hat?
If you do make your target, it's a big clown's hat. And I was basically given the yellow pages and said, right, you need to phone from, I don't know, maybe it was P to R or whatever, and literally just going down the phone book, trying to sell free phone numbers to whoever would actually pick up the phone. That was like 25 years ago, something like that. I hate to admit.
You were, what, 15, 16?
Yeah, well, a bit old, the sad thing is, you know, in many respects, it's not really evolved that far until recent times with data. I mean, people obviously would always recommend that you take that more personalized approach where you do your research before you start targeting prospects. But that's very hard to do at scale. And that's the big difference now. The more sophisticated tech and with AI that's enabling you to, you know, crunch the numbers and really get through the data at such huge volumes, it is pretty game changing. But as always with these things, there's an element of, you know, you got to take it with a little bit of a pinch of salt. You know, there's some people that I've seen that are touting AI as the next kind of actual SDR. You know, it would make the phone calls for you, and you'll go out and search prospects and approach them for you through email and LinkedIn. You know, so almost completely relegating the human role in the process.
That's very similar to the ability now to use AI to create a podcast like this one.
Yeah.
But I mean, maybe
there
people
are,
don't.
and they're probably more successful than us.
Maybe, but you wouldn't want to listen to it, would you?
No.
Maybe people don't want to listen to this one either. But you know, and it's actually for similar reasons. You know, if you think that someone's produced a podcast by putting a prompt in and got an AI narration and plonked it out, then you're going to guess that the quality isn't going to be that great, and therefore they've not made much effort, and therefore you're not really going to want to sit and listen to it, are you?
No. Well, you know, it's just too formulaic. That's always the problem. Even with this new approach, it's still a challenge to get. Ultimately, if someone is not interested for whatever reason, it's still probably going to end in a no. But I think you're going to get through. You're going to be targeted better. So you're probably going to get to people that are more likely to buy based on the signals and intent. You're going to have better conversations because they're going to be slightly warmer, because people aren't just going to try and get you off the phone straight away, because they'll have a little bit of sympathy for the fact that you've shown some effort or demonstrated some effort to research them and understand them a little bit more. So it's going to make the life of the SDR a little bit better.
They're also going to, you know, if you're making effort by taking more of a multi-channel approach, such as sharing a video with them, for example, which people have been doing for a long time, then again, you're more likely to engage with that, aren't you?
Yeah, it's just doing it at scale in a more personalized way. That's the big difference that AI is going to make. But I think we're still, even though signals intent been around for a good while, I think we're still some way to go until it's really its true potential. So I think we're still, I wouldn't say early days, but we're kind of maybe into phase 2 or 3 of a longer journey.
Cool. Should we wrap up?
Yeah.
Do you want to take it away, Craig, on the summary?
Well, for me, I just think, it goes under the radar, Outbound.
People don't be a snob, basically.
Yeah, people don't like to necessarily admit it, that they do it. The irony is a lot of the time the marketing function itself will be targeted by vendors and agencies, and because they're budget holders, and it's sort of the irony is a lot of marketers will refuse to take cold calls and almost sort of have a dim view of any vendors that approach them that way, yet they have a team of SDRs themselves that do exactly the same. Works. Yeah, and they know that it works. So there is a lot of snobbery around. It's almost like, yeah, we do it, but we don't really want to shout about it.
Which is a bit ironic because it's also the marketer's best friend, isn't it? If you think about it, if you've got a sales team, how often do we hear, well, the leads are shit? If you've got an SDR function that's processing those, qualifying them further, only sending quality leads to sales, ultimately, that problem goes away.
Yeah.
For marketing teams to diss the SDR function when it can be, their best friend is also ironic.
I don't think there's any shame in having an SDR function. It's a vital component in any growth program, any growth team. But I think the old way of working is, we that's why often I think it has sort of been quite tarnished as a discipline, because cold calling, it just sounds
in a reputation.
Yeah, problem. As I say, it's back 25 years sitting in a room selling free phone numbers with the yellow pages. It's not going to be effective. It's a very expensive way of trying to generate opportunities.
So we've got to get over the snobbery. We've got to ditch the yellow pages. We've got to collaborate we've got to collaborate between sales, SDR, and marketing functions much more closely. And we've got to get the right tech in place to mean that signals can be surfaced at the right time, intent data can be surfaced at the right time, and therefore we can prioritize who we go out to rather than plowing through the yellow pages. And we need to get tools in place that enable that outreach to be even more effective and even more personalized, so that when you do get on the phone, the person is actually likely to be interested in what you've got to say.
Yeah. Lovely job.
Good.
Thanks for joining us. If you haven't already, go ahead and subscribe to our podcast on your favourite podcasting channel. And if you enjoyed this episode, then do us a solid and leave a review and a rating. If you want more insights and resources, head over to romy-associates.com. We'll see you next time.